I saw this on TikTok and it blew my mind. Backlit translucent stone. It looked insane. I had no idea what it was or how to use it. And the instructions left me with even more questions. If I could figure it out, this could make one seriously epic cabinet. Jerry wasn't so sure. So I designed a wall-mounted walnut cabinet, simple form, bold statement. Just one problem. Curved work is always a nightmare. Thin laminations, multiple bending forms, tight tolerances, and of course, the usual chaos.
How the heck am I gonna hold this in place?
Patching dumb mistakes, getting an F in geometry, and a full-blown existential crisis when this happened. Then, just when I thought I had the materials figured out, surprise! But the hardest builds usually pay off the most. So, did it work? Or did I just waste 2 weeks chasing a TikTok fever dream? Here is the cardboard prototype that I made from my scale drawing that I had done in SketchUp. And after looking at it, I realized this is just a little too fat. I mean, it's meant to be kind of wide and a little stocky looking, but it's just too big. So here's what I started with, and then I shrunk it down into this. So it's just downsized a little bit. As you can see, my SketchUp skills are lacking, to say the least, but gives me a good idea of the final product. Now I can start making the bending forms. And to do this, I'll be using 1/4 inch MDF and cutting it with the shaper origin. I created a vector file, then brought it into the machine, and now we'll cut one, which will then be the template to cut the top and bottom of our main bending form. Now, I suppose I could have used the shaper origin to cut the actual plywood for the top and bottom layer, but there's something very satisfying about template routing. It's loud, it's messy. All right, maybe I need to rethink that theory. And to save my router bit a little bit of hard fighting, I'll nibble away as much waste as I can on the miter saw. And a lot of times I'll use double-sided tape to stick down a template to my piece, but I've had too many instances where it has slipped on me, so if I can screw it, I'm gonna screw it. Who's with me? Now, once I've used that template, I've now created a new master template, and I'm going to use that to template route the other piece of plywood. That way I know they're exactly the same. And this 1/2 inch compression flush trim bit from Bits and Bits is bonkers, as you can see. Now, there's many ways you can build a bending form. You've seen me do them out of solid MDF to make a giant block, which is exactly how we'll create the smaller bending form for the bow front bottom. But for this one, we're going to use the ribbing technique, which requires a lot of internal ribs to give it its strength. Did I go overboard here? Maybe. But I mean, come on. Who doesn't love a nice rack of ribs? Now with that bottom layer and all the ribs in place, I could glue the lid on and completely pepper it with brad nails. Now this weird bendable plywood, generally known as wiggle wood or wacky wood, is able to be flexible and bend like Gumby because each layer of the plywood is oriented in the same direction. Whereas typical plywood, each alternating layer, the grain changes direction, making it more rigid and solid. Now, if you do happen to go by this, there are 2 types you can get, a barrel fold or a column wrap. The column wrap has the grain running vertically in the 96-inch direction, whereas the barrel fold has the grain going across in the 48-inch direction. So, with one, you can make a very long column, and the other makes a barrel. Yeah, I think that's right. Now to begin the resawing marathon. Now luckily, I only have to resaw a couple of pieces. One for the main frame of the cabinet, and the other for the bow front, which we'll do later. And as long as I don't have any problems, one piece should do it. Should being the operative word here that I erroneously inserted into the resaw section of my Mad Libs book. Now, if memory serves, that was my 8th seltzer of the night, and it was after midnight at this point. I was a little exhausted, but Jerry the man will just hang all night. Well, because he can just sleep 16 hours the next day. Now, a thin lamination's ability to bend around a radius is determined by many factors: width of material, type of material, attitude of material, and of course, thickness of material. 1.34 millimeters. Whew, that's thin. Jerry can't believe it. Now, a lot of times I'll make a two-piece bending form, or a male and female, which will give me ultimate even clamping pressure. However, with this one, I didn't really have time to do that, which is why I have turned this thing into Swiss cheese, so I have all these holes to put my clamps in. Now, when I calculated the dimensions for this bending form, I also had to figure in the thickness of the wiggle board and also a layer of 1/8 inch cork. So what I've done here is drawn a center line on the face of all my strips, as well as a center line on my bending form, and a corresponding center line on my bending strap. Once everything gets glued up, I can make sure that we're all in alignment and nothing slides this way or that. Total boat, baby! Now, one of my favorite adhesives for gluing up bent laminations is Total Boat High Performance Epoxy. And this is for several reasons. The biggest one being is open time. You get about 30 minutes, maybe 35, depending on ambient temperature. So there's plenty of time to manipulate your pieces, get them in place, get all your clamps on, and not have a complete mental breakdown because the glue is drying too fast. It's also easy to use a foam roller to get a nice, even film thickness on every piece. And I do like to coat the front and back of each piece. Well, you don't want to do the front and back of the bottom piece or the top piece, because that could be bad, okay? Now, I realized very quickly that I didn't drill enough holes to accommodate the number of clamps that I was going to need. But in the end, my goal of this looking like the chair out of Game of Thrones was a success. Whew. And now for the impetus of this entire project. And as I mentioned in the intro, I saw a video on TikTok using translucent onyx stone as the back layer for a built-in. Now, this isn't technically onyx stone. This is called maca stone. It's just a very thin layer of stone veneer that is stuck to 2 layers of polyester resin. Now, to find the piece I like the best, I cut this little cardboard window. And to be honest, at this point, I didn't find an area that I liked. I think I just had something in my head of how I thought it was going to look, and none of these areas delivered on that. I wanted it to almost have a burning orange look, like a sunset or a sunrise. Hence, the name of this cabinet is the Solsetter cabinet, which is Old Icelandic for sunrise and sunset. But more on the material choice a little later. You can see we got a little spring back going here, but it's not a big deal in this case because the bottom of the cabinet is going to pull this tight together, so I'm not worried about it. So we'll turn that frown upside down. Now, I find the easiest way to clean up and square up one edge is to do this on the jointer. And then once that's nice and smooth, then take that same face and run it against the fence on your table saw and square up the other side. You can see here on the side of this case where we have some gaps. The light should indicate that pretty well. And the reason for this is I didn't build a 2-part bending form because I didn't want to spend the extra time. So those waves or undulations are really a result of these clamps and the extreme clamping pressure required to squeeze everything together. What I should have done, since I didn't build a 2-part bending form, was taken a solid piece of wood on these straight parts, and that would have completely eliminated that. Because I don't have as much of that on the top where I had that clamping strap, because that distributed the clamping pressure across more evenly. But this is easy enough to massage with a hand plane and some sanding. We'll get it nice and smooth. And now to make the bending form for the bow front bottom storage area. This one I am going to be doing out of solid MDF, But I'm still only going to make a one-piece bending form because for this one, the vacuum press is my friend. Well, hopefully. Oh, look. Lola thinks shaper tape is a toy. She's incorrigible. Oh, don't do that, Lola. We're rolling here. Okay, roughly same drill as before, making a template out of 1/4-inch MDF. And then we'll head over to the router table and template route the heck out of this thing. Well, we'll rough cut it at the bandsaw first, obviously. And I actually had some double thick MDF from another project laying around, so that saved me a step. So based on the width of my lamination, which was roughly 4 1/4, I needed 6 layers of MDF to give me sufficient width to bend around. And some glue and screws made quick work of that, and I had a bending form. But what I didn't have was my laminations. So I resawed those and then ran them all through the drum sander. Got some pretty cool grain on these ones. Now for a flex check. Oh yeah, that's way more bendability than we need.
All right, so this is where things get a little bit tricky. Since this bow front is going to come around and then square off and go through the inside of the case, what I need to do is figure out exactly where that cut line is going to be and cut the strips to those lengths. Otherwise, the grain match won't wrap around each end. Unfortunately, as you can see here, what happens, the outside piece ends up being shorter than the inside pieces, so I can only do what I can do. And since that grain wrap is going to occur inside the cabinet and within the shadows, you're really not going to see it. But I want to do the best I can to try to get that grain to look continuous sides and around the front.
It's always good to have Jerry guarding the door while I'm tuck taping a bending form. Makes a man feel safe. I wasn't being sarcastic, bro. Now I did draw a center line on my strips as well as on my bending form, just like I did on the main cabinet. Now I will concede, having a cat with sharp claws standing on your vac bag is not the best idea. Now, just to show you guys, I am not a one glue pony. For this lamination, I'm using Gorilla Glue polyurethane glue. A lot of people don't like this because it foams up, but I think that's because most people put too much down. Again, just like epoxy, using a foam roller, you get a nice, even film thickness, and you'll barely get any foamage at all. Foamage. Yep, that's a word. And a little green tape helps keep those laminations lined up. And to try and prevent any of that Gorilla Glue from getting on the inside of my vac bag, I actually taped the laminations down to the form and then put a little shrink wrap around them as well. And now for a little downward suction. Since I was going to start working with some very accurate measurements in how this bow front storage compartment was going to fit inside the case, I thought it prudent to screw in a spacer, which would ensure the inside dimensions of the cabinet remained constant while I worked on it. And this is also why I didn't trim the cabinet sides to their length, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to screw into the side of it. Now remember when I showed you the sides were a little wavy and I said, oh, it'll be easy, I'll just hit it with a hand plane and smooth everything out? Well, that plan was working flawlessly until I plane right through that outside lamination to the epoxy below. So now what? Well, first, I needed to finish smoothing out the rest of the case to give me a nice smooth surface for laminating another piece on the outside. And while my soul died a little bit on the inside, I thought of how I was actually going to adhere this to the case. I certainly couldn't use my bending form again because I would never get even clamping pressure all the way around. So I decided to sleep on it. And before I tackled that problem the next day, I pulled the other bent lamination out of the bag, which looked pretty good. And once I finally got it unwrapped from its tape and shrink wrap, I was able to square it all up at the jointer and the table saw. And then it hit me. Contact cement. Yeah. No clamps required, just a little bit of pressure. This was the way to go. And there might be some naysayers out there saying, how could you use contact cement on furniture and wood? I've never had a failure using this stuff. And this is actually the water-based version, so it's way less toxic, lower VOCs, and the fumes won't kill everything in a 1-mile radius. And that'll put you right on the EPA's Christmas card list. And cleaning up those edges was as simple as running a block plane all the way around until it was nice and flush. Now, cleaning up that Gorilla Glue squeeze out on that smaller lamination was a tad more arduous. Lots of card scraping and sanding.
So on my straight edge here, I've marked out the inside of my case. One line here and one line here. And I've also drawn a center line. I have a center line on my curved bow front here. Now to get that to line up with the center line on the straight edge, this little square here, and then I'll move this around until it comes into contact with it. So with that in place, now I can transfer this line to my bow front on both sides so I know where to cut it. So I'm just going to use a smaller square, draw a vertical line. So since this is going to come around and get mitered, and then this piece will wrap on the inside, I need to figure out what that miter is going to be. So I've drawn out the dimensions of the interior of the case and then a center line. What I'm going to do is line up all those lines together and then cut this as a test piece to figure out that angle. So I think the best way to do this is to draw a line here showing the actual thickness of our piece. And then I think going from the outer corner and then drawing a diagonal down to that intersection should give us our angle. So apparently my brain wasn't on enough caffeine when I was figuring this whole thing out, because some of you may have already figured out that if I cut this and bend it around, this surface isn't flat, so it can't live on the inside of the case. However, all the layout still works to give me this cut. So what I did at the miter saw was that layout line or diagonal that we traced here, I determined to be 41.5 degrees. To make the complementary cut to fit inside the case, that will be 48.5 degrees. Now, fortunately, I still have some of these laminations left over from when I resawed all this. So I'm actually going to glue this together, throw it in the vac bag real quick, and then I'll be able to cut that 48.5 degree angle on each one, and we can glue it on each side.
Boy, it never ends, does it, folks? These little projects you think aren't going to take long just require so many small processes.
So now I can place my test piece and then draw these diagonals. That will be the cut line.
And while that other piece is in the vac bag, let's move on to the stone and the explanation of how this gets backlit and layered, because there is a big potential issue when backlighting.
When the LED diodes are lit up from behind, you might see all the individual diodes. So the LEDs need to be set back a bit from the stone. So what I've done here is kind of lay out each layer and how much space I need to actually wrap it out in the back of the cabinet. So there'll be a solid back panel that's 3/16 of an inch thick, followed by an 1/8 inch layer of acrylic that will have the LEDs stuck to them, which I'm calculating at roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. Then I'll need a 1/2 inch gap, an air gap with nothing in there, followed by a 1/4 inch layer of acrylic that will have this maca stone adhered to it using some sort of clear silicone. So when you add that all up, we end up with roughly 1 3/16 inches that I need to rabbet out of the back of the cabinet. And we'll do that over at the router table. So I need to swap out the bearing on this rabbeting bit on the router table. And typically to unscrew that, I would use an Allen key. But the LTT store was kind enough to send out their new ratcheting multi-bit screwdriver with hidden bit storage. It's going to pop out a little Allen key, which, by the way, these are magnetic. And the great thing about this, if you want to tighten it, which turns to the right, you just turn this to the right. If you want to loosen, you turn it to the left. So I'm going to loosen this swap out this bearing and click this back to the right and tighten it down. You can hear, oh, it has such a smooth ratcheting mechanism. Get the perfect tightness. We're good.
The LTT store screwdriver is the ultimate ratcheting screwdriver. It comes in this well-designed package with the driver and 12 rust-resistant bits that can be stored inside the handle that was designed in partnership with MegaPro. And it opens and closes with a very satisfying spring-loaded mechanism. What do you think, Jerry? I think he likes it. And the intricate diamond cut knurling gives you precise control. And although it was designed for PC building, I found it incredibly useful for swapping nozzles on my 3D printer, working on my CO2 laser, and fiddling with LED circuit boards when I try to play engineer. It also comes with this magnet bit that the LTT store calls the screw retriever, which is perfect for clumsy me when I drop screws into unreachable places. And I actually like this screwdriver so much that I bought the stubby version as well as all the different bits. And I 3D printed this super cool case, which houses everything perfectly. So thanks to the LTT store for sponsoring this video. And now back to the noisy, messy stuff. Now, because this rabbit or rebate, whatever you want to call it, is 1 3/16 inches, I can't take that all in one pass. It's also a 1/4 inch wide, and I didn't want to take all of that material in one pass either, because it can result in a lot of chip out or tear out. So I needed to take it in 1/8 inch increments. And here's what I almost screwed up. I thought I would have to change the bearing for a deeper pass, but I had already created an 1/8 inch deep rabbet. So now I just ride that bearing on that new depth, and it adds another 1/8 to it, creating a full 1/4 inch. And although I dodged one mistake...
Okay, welcome to another segment of Here's What I Screwed Up. Since there will be a shelf running here, and this top section will be the only area where that stone is and acrylic, I don't need that full depth all the way around. And I accidentally ran it all the way around on the first pass. So to fill that area in, I'm just going to cut some strips, find a grain match as best I can, and glue that in. Unfortunately, I didn't have a piece that matched this grain exactly, but I did have an offcut from the piece, so the color is the same, and I think it's a pretty good blend. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. All right, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side, but you're gonna have to use your imagination because I'm not gonna film that.
And while those marinate, let's pull our baby lamination out of the vac bag and get that cut.
Why didn't that work? So as you can see here, this is what I screwed up. This bevel is a lot longer than this. And the reason for that, when I drew everything out on this piece of MDF and I drew this line, I should have drawn from this point to this point. This angle should actually be 56, not 41.5, and the other angle should be 34 on the side piece. Now we're going to recut those. All right, let's see how this thing fits. There we go. So I just need to make a back and a bottom, and the valet trays, sand finish. It's nearly done. You can see there, it's virtually undetectable. The grain actually follows the same direction nice as well.
Well, crisis averted. Now on to the middle shelf. Got to make a template and check the fit.
So as you can see, the radius on this does not come out as far as the bow front bottom here, which I like. I don't want them in the same plane, but I'm still not sure if I like that or not. If we turn it around where it's perfectly straight across, might have to phone a friend on this one.
And my man Copper Pig comes in hard and fast with that decision. Curved it is. And now to get an accurate layout of where that shelf is going to reside, so I know exactly where that rabbet ends to meet the shelf. And to do this, it's going to require a little bit of hand tool work. But first, I'm going to clear the majority of the waste away with a drill bit, and then start chiseling. As you may have noticed in this video, there's no underbed of music. And I'm curious if you guys care about that. Does it matter? Would you rather hear more shop sounds? The music is completely irrelevant? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments below. Now, our little shelf here also needed a rabbet to match the corresponding rabbet in the case. And each of the parts for the curved front storage section also needed a groove for the bottom of it. Now, this required 2 passes because I needed a full 1/4 of an inch. Oh, and another glue up. Yeah, I forgot we actually needed to make that bottom panel. And then when that was out of the clamps, run it through the planer to get the exact thickness to fit that groove. Now there is another glue up that I spared you from, which is the back panel. And as you may recall, this was 3/16 of an inch thick. Okay, so we've reached a design fork in the road that actually has 3 forks. And the first option being having this bow front proud of the side of the case, and then also seeing the sides here. The second option being pushing everything back, and then having that bow front gracefully blend into the side of the case here. And the third option is actually pushing it back roughly 1/8 of an inch to give it a little dimension. And my initial instinct was to have everything proud of the sides. But then when I look at it flush and when I look at it set back, I like all 3. So, and after bugging my buddy Paul at Copper Pig Fine Woodworking again, my cameraman Matthew, Jerry, Lola, the mailman, my magic 8-ball, it was decided that that bow front should be flush and gracefully blend in with the sides. Now bear in mind, this cabinet is an exercise in design. I had an idea of what I wanted to do or what I thought it should look like, the maca stone being the focal point of the whole thing. But sometimes you just can't plan for every design detail, because if you do, you'll quickly realize as you are building that your original ideas weren't going to work or they just didn't look good. So it's okay to struggle with these design decisions during the build and ask other people for their opinions. And you know what? Sometimes it's not until after the project is built that you realize, I should have done it this way. And I always come back to what my buddy Paul says, which is you can't have V2 without V1, meaning version 1 is kind of the pilot test. It shows you what works and what doesn't. And then V2 should improve on the things that you didn't like, but should also inspire new design details that you hadn't considered in the first place. All right, let's talk about this glue up, because it did require some pre-planning and some dry runs. When clamping something curved to something straight, I found the best thing to do is create custom clamping blocks that allow you to give even clamping pressure across that joint. It takes a little extra time to do that, but the amount of time and frustration it saves you when doing the actual glue up is well worth it. Now, I could have done some more advanced joinery on this shelf, like a sliding dovetail or a stop dado, but this isn't going to hold a lot of weight. And while glue would be more than sufficient, I wanted to add a little bling, a little special detail to the side. So using the shaper origin, I cut a couple of through mortises on each side and then cut some corresponding loose tenons. I did run a couple of test cuts to get the perfect fit and then cut the 4 tenons. And to add a little bit of bling, I decided to do a wedge mortise and tenon using brass wedges. Now, admittedly, I should have put more of a taper on those wedges or brought them down to a sharper, thinner point, because they did fight me going in. Sometimes brute force doesn't always work. And CA glue is actually the magic adhesive, other than epoxy, for securing these brass wedges. Just make sure you rough up the surface with a coarse grit sandpaper to give that surface a little more tooth for that glue to grab onto. Now, brass is soft enough where you can just use a typical flush trim saw to get it as close to the surface as you can, and then you can clean up with a file and finish up with some sandpaper. And you should end up with something that looks like this. Now, although this back panel is thin, there certainly is potential for movement. So while I am going to trace out the actual shape to fit the back, I'm going to cut it a 1/16 of an inch short all the way around to allow for expansion and contraction. That should be enough. And at long last, I could finally trim the sides of the cabinet to length, which will finally allow the assembly process of this whole cabinet to move along rather quickly. Now, if you recall from earlier, I need several layers of acrylic for the top section of this cabinet. I need a piece of 1/4 inch clear that will stick the maca stone to, which is what I'm cutting here, as well as 2 pieces of frosted white, represented here. Now, I just buy this cast acrylic off of Amazon. It's pretty cheap, and it does the job really well. Now, remember when I said I didn't really like that piece of maca stone I got? Well, I ordered another piece from a different supplier. Okay, so the new piece of... What the... This is completely covered in scratches. And it's ship rolled up, which does not help. Ugh. This is absolutely trashed. There's cracks everywhere, scratches. This is like completely fractured. Useless. All right. Looks like we're going back to the original piece, which I didn't love, but there's not enough time to order anything else. So I'm going to have to pick something in here and go with it. Now, using the original mask I had cut, I mapped out 3 separate sections of possible candidates that I could use. Sometimes you just don't know if a piece is going to work until it's actually in place in the cabinet and backlit. Now, to cut this stuff, they say just to use regular tools, like a circ saw or miter saw. And although I don't have a lot of experience in cutting stone, I do know that a diamond blade will work best. Fortunately, I had one kicking around, and because this material is so thin, ranging from 0.6 millimeters to roughly 2 millimeters, it literally took 5 minutes to cut these 3 pieces out. Now, although I didn't film backlighting each individual piece, it was quickly clear which piece was the winner. Now, the next step was to use clear construction adhesive to stick the stone to the 1/4 inch acrylic. Now, I'm using Gorilla Glue adhesive, and it does say to back butter both sides, but what it doesn't tell you is to make sure there are no pockets or air bubbles, which will come back to bite me. So we'll let this sit overnight and cure. All right, moment of truth. Cool. That'll work. And now a little sanding and surface prep montage with the slider. Stepping up the production value here. Now, I keep wanting to call this little bow front storage area a drawer, even though it's not technically a drawer. I mean, it functions as a drawer, it just doesn't slide out. And now that we have that cleared up, we're going to glue in the bow front pseudo drawer. And yes, gluing this in place is a bit of a wood movement concern. However, this isn't a solid piece of wood to a solid piece of wood. It's multiple layers of thin laminations. I'm using PVA glue, which is relatively soft and does allow some wood movement. I think it'll be okay. But remember, this is V1. So on V2, I may come up with a better solution for attaching that, not drawer. Jerry seems relatively ambivalent to it either way. Okay, lighting. These are cob LEDs, which should help by not seeing the actual diodes through the stone. So what we did here on some white acrylic is with the laser, scored some lines so I can follow them easily. This also was a math problem to maximize the length of this strand of cob LEDs, so I didn't get to the end and have a bunch left over, or get to the end and have not enough. So just gonna peel each ring off one at a time and lay the LEDs down. So this will take a while, so enjoy the time lapse. Now, if I was using a music underbed in this video, I'd probably put in some kind of Benny Hill music here for this, but instead you'll just have to listen to me talk and enjoy my LED Cinnabon swirling skills. Ooh, that's bright. All right, now the true test. Uh-oh. You can see the LEDs. Now, these are supposed to be set to a certain distance behind, but it's all variable, and I can't go any further away. So, plan B. Okay, what I did here was put a piece of frosted acrylic between the stone and the LEDs, and it looks like it diffused it enough. Probably the best I'm going to be able to get. As usual, Jerry is stoic as can be. Now, I didn't mention before the exact finish that I'm using on this case, but I've used it several times before in other videos. It is a hard wax oil that is cured by a high-intensity LED light. This specific one is Heidelberg Pro Lignum, and I actually mix up my own little special brew with a 2-to-1 mix of ultra matte to semi-gloss, because for some reason they don't make a satin. And I've been relatively vocal on my opinion on this product in the past because while it works very well on small projects like this that don't get a lot of abuse, I don't find it durable enough to use on larger pieces of furniture for client builds. Now, you have seen me use it on a desk and a bookcase for my niece, and you'll see me use it on an upcoming project for my mother, but as something that I would actually sell and give to a client, no, I would not feel comfortable with this particular finish holding up over time. Unless you put something like a ceramic coating on top. I think it scratches very easily, it's very difficult to repair, and it's quite finicky to apply. Now, another rather significant detail we haven't discussed is the insert tray that will go into this bow front pseudo drawer. It would serve not only as a valet tray, but also to hide all of the power and electronics for the LEDs below. Wood was certainly an option, but in the interest of speed, I decided to 3D print this, and I kind of like the look of the mixed materials. 3D printing also makes it much easier to customize and make changes as needed. Okay, I'm going to be as transparent as possible here on the lighting and LED part of this build. I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know how to achieve it. I wanted rechargeable LEDs, so I didn't have a cord hanging down, and I also wanted a remote control with adjustable settings. Unfortunately, all the LEDs I could find that were powerful enough to backlight this stone the way I wanted had to be plugged in. Now, I'm sure there is a way to hook up rechargeable battery packs to the LEDs I got. I just didn't have time to figure it out. Hence, V1 will be improved when I do V2. But if any of you have suggestions, I would love to hear them. Because when it comes to electrical engineering like this, I need help. Okay, before we do the final assembly and reveal, let's go through how each of these layers fits into the case. Okay, the first layer is the maca stone adhered to a 1/4-inch piece of acrylic. As you can see all the air bubbles. So if you end up doing this yourself, make sure you don't have any of those. This slides right in there. Next is a piece of 1/8-inch acrylic with these little spacer blocks here that were glued on with CA glue. That goes on top of that. That's a nice tight fit. I actually have clear acrylic here because I ran out of these. So these spacers give us our 1/2-inch gap. And now the 1/8-inch acrylic with the cob LEDs that look like a hot mess on there. I also had to notch this out here so that the lights could then go through the back. And to do that, I'm going to run that cord through. And this channel is for that cob light to sit in, and then I'll put some black electrical tape over that so it blends right in. And I know this is messing with everybody's OCD,
that it's not clean, but it's the back of the cabinet, and you won't see it. And until I figure out a different solution, this is what we're going with. All right, moment of truth, Jerry. What the heck? Oh, the sensor. That's not great. Hey! Jerry, look at that! Wild! I don't know if you can see this on camera. This dark spot here. There's one here and kind of in here. Oop, over here. That is where there were air bubbles in the clear silicone when I stuck the stone to the acrylic. I didn't think it was going to be noticeable, but it is. I mean, it kind of looks like imperfections, but either way, that looks super cool. Jerry, let's turn the lights out.
Well, the LEDs are still a work in progress, as well as some construction details, but I am really happy with this piece as a design concept. I love working with new mediums and exploring how I can incorporate them into my work. Hopefully, this video inspires you to do the same. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.